Hello, everyone. Welcome into Above My Pay Grade. I have two military guests with me today. One is Lawrence from Green Collar Finance, and one is Jaime from Financial Enabler. Both have been in the military for quite some time. I've had Jaime on the podcast before, but I messaged them on Instagram the other day because these guys are both whizzes with personal finance. And one of the things I think is missing in personal finance, and that's what we're going to get into, is how the national debt affects personal finance, specifically for us, because all of us are either going to do 20 years or close to hitting our 20-year mark, and that comes with a pension. If you were injured in the military, you have VA benefits, and those benefits come from the government. And if the government mismanages their pocketbook, you cannot squeeze blood from a rock. And no matter how much we complain, if there's no more money to spend, and I'm not saying this will happen tomorrow, this could affect the military. So, gentlemen, thanks for coming on. Thanks for taking the time to be here. So, one of my first questions. We'll start with you, Lawrence. You know, we keep it professional here.
That was my mom. I'm sorry. I told my mom.
So what I think a good question to kind of roll back, because if we're talking about where to invest, how to diversify, these guys are great. If you're new in the military and you want to start with step one, hey, what do I do with my money? How do I save? How do I buy a car, et cetera, et cetera? These guys are great. But one of the things I want to even roll back even further from that is talking about money itself, because so it's something we take for granted. It's something that is something we just assume is the piece of paper in our wallet, but that piece of paper is different if we go somewhere else, right? So what would you guys say is your definition of money? Lawrence, we'll start with you.
So the definition of money for me is a value exchange. Whether it was a chicken for a chicken, if there's a plethora of chickens, that chicken's worth less. And so the supply and demand of that thing within the value exchange is what money is. We use the US dollar because the majority of the world, as the Federal Reserve or the reserve currency for the world, it has a higher value than most other currencies based on its ability to value exchange. That may not be the case in the future with other things, but that is my definition of what money is.
Okay, Jaime, what about you?
I wouldn't be too far off from it. And I think, I don't know if it was you, but after reading the Fiat Standard and the Bitcoin Standard, both those books are excellent. I think that's when I learned, I was like, it's exactly what Lawrence said. Something that is of value, and it doesn't have to be of value as in valuable, but also valuable to the community, right? Any moment now, we could go to a hat exchange. We could go to a mouse exchange. It just so happens that right now is the digital version of a piece of paper.
Right. And I think a lot of people get target locked on the fact that their currency is what they use, but obviously currency is different, and they get what is that, like number bias, like, because you can go to Korea and spend 1,000 won on something that would cost $3 here in the United States. So a lot of people have that bias that bigger numbers are better. But the value and the price is something that I like to tell people to focus on, because value and price can change. So price going up doesn't necessarily mean the value is going up. For instance, we've all experienced the last couple of years housing prices. Those of us in the military who have been forced to PCS, they have this very unfortunate problem of their BAH. And for those of you who aren't in the military, that stands for Basic Allowance for Housing. Just like everything else in the military, it kind of moves at a snail's pace. It doesn't update well, we'll put it that way, for some people. So these people who are forced to move, they find a new location. Their Basic Allowance for Housing doesn't cover the housing because it went up about 40% in the last 3 years. So they're forced to move further off base to be able to afford it. And then gas is $4 a gallon. So for people in that realm who are struggling to make ends meet. And the military traditionally has kept up with inflation. I'll do air quotes on that. Inflation. It's kept up with inflation. But the last couple of years, and the first time in my career, I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, they raised, mid-year, they raised BAH. And everyone thought when interest rates went up, housing prices would come down. But that's why I say it's important to understand what price and value are, because the value didn't necessarily go up because it's still a house. It's the same bricks and sticks. But the price went up. Why did the price go up? The money printer during COVID. Now, do you guys think, as far as service members, housing allowance, etc., one of the things I'm concerned about over the next couple of years is that service members' basic allowance for housing, subsistence, etc., will continue to eke away at that. So, in other words, if inflation's 5%, they'll get a 3% pay raise. And then the next year, inflation's 10%, they'll get an 8% pay raise. In reality, over those 2 years, they took a 5% pay cut. What do you guys think about that? Do you think that that's realistic with the way the government works and the way military benefits work? Do you think that trend is going to continue, the trend we've seen the last 2 years?
Well, I think so. I don't think the problem is that the budget does not keep up with the market nearly as fast. So we're always going to be a step behind, right? Even if all things can, well, I'm gonna make a joke right now. If the Department of Defense was really good at counting, then we probably could. But since we're unusually bad at it, we won't be able to keep up with it, right? And then obviously I know that comes to the federal level, but we're not going to be able to react to the market, because even if right now we matched inflation, come January 31st, it may be totally different. So it's absolutely impossible for us to, in my opinion, to have an accurate prediction. But at some point, this is going to help us. Let's say 2040, right? We're going to be getting paid a ton of money, and then inflation is going to drop, prices are going to change, and people are going to be like, oh my God, being in the military is amazing. We're making a ton of money. But we don't know when that's going to happen.
I guess,
Lawrence, what do you think?
I guess what I would have to ask is, what is inflation? So what you have to consider is the fact that once you start stripping everything away from inflation, as the government has, once you start changing the way that it is measured, going from a 2-year rolling to a 1-year rolling, and you continue rolling out, oh, this is core inflation, I'm going to take out all the things that cause inflation. So if we are looking at those numbers, and that's what where calculations are off of, how can you forecast correctly anyway? What you have to understand is the majority of these things and these changes that we're having take place within BAH and BAS and all these other options are looking in the past. It's financial modeling in the past, not forecasting. And so it's very, very hard also within the PPB cycle, which is kind of how all of this works in the financial things from the financial government side of the equation. A lot of this stuff's already been allotted, and you only have up to a certain period of time in order to make the changes and adjust on the fly. And so for them to do those changes in the middle of the year was a miracle in itself, if you have fully in the process of understanding how government finance works. It was a miracle. And so it's always going to be looking in the past and what has happened, not necessarily what's going to happen. And if you keep changing the definition how inflation is measured, there's no way to properly do it anyway.
Yeah, that's my contention. That, like, you can call it a let's just say this: if the government gives it, a government agency gives the report card to the government on how bad the inflation is, I think that's a conflict of interest. And so, big picture, I think the government, one of the problems I tell people is we've been living on debt for a long period of time, right? So we spend, like, for ease of figuring, let's say we take in $4 trillion in taxes and we spend $6 trillion. How do we spend that extra $2 trillion? We spend that by people loaning the government money in the form of bonds, right? The problem is those bonds come with an interest rate, right? And they are never paid off. As Lawrence said, they're rolling, meaning once that term for the bond, that debt term, or that you gave them a loan for 10 years, once that 10 years comes up, the government just takes out another loan for that principal with new interest. Here's the problem. We have done this for so long that our debt alone, just the interest on it, is more expensive than the United States military, the most powerful military in the world. And so this cycle of taking on debt to pay for things that you cannot afford, everyone knows in their personal life that this is a problem. In the government, they have one lever that you personally don't have, and that is printing. And when they print, they debase your purchasing power. And one of the things I'm, I guess, nervous about is that obviously we have a recruiting crisis, et cetera. And I see it with my troops, my younger troops, et cetera, that they're having a hard time. Like, if you have a family and you're under an E5, you're struggling. Most people are struggling. And there's things you can do to make your life easier. And a lot of people don't do those things, and they should start with that. But when we keep taking those little chunks, right, that, like I was talking about, we say inflation's 3, but it's actually like 20. A good example of this is the government just came out with year-over-year inflation numbers a week ago or so, and they said food inflation was 3%. And you don't have to be an economist to know that that's about to be right? So what I'm trying to explain to people, I'd love your thoughts on this, is that the government has to lie about inflation. And my fear is that inflation will get progressively worse, where those chunks that are taken out of your pay because of inflation isn't 2%, it's 10%. And then it's 20%. And then it's, oh, okay, I can't even afford, because what's different for the military, and a lot of folks don't understand this, you have to move. You don't get a choice. It's not like you're like, hey, I got this great interest rate on my house, I got to stay put. You have to move, right? And then you have to rent in that new location or buy or whatever you got to do. So do you guys have that same fear or, I guess, intuition that the government will progressively have to pay less in real terms? Your paycheck's going to be going up. Your purchasing power is going to be going down. You guys think that?
Go ahead, Lawrence.
So, yes, I believe that is a possibility, especially as they continue changing the definition of things. I think also we have a personal requirement in our personal economies in order to make fluctuations for that. Currently, the U.S. credit card debt is at an all-time high of like $1.07 trillion. That's money we didn't. That's money we didn't have,
right,
in the personal economy.
But that's for a year, folks.
Yes,
just so you know.
So the thing is, as we look at that, you're right. Our purchasing power is going to be lowered, but we have to figure out ways to play the game in order to create a gap in what we owe, our fixed expenses, some of our variable expenses, and what we have coming in. And is it going to be easy? No. I do think that it's going to create, you're going to have those issues, but there are ways in the tax code in order to build businesses and such that you can start creating a wage gap from what you have coming in compared to what you have coming out, and using different codes within the IRS and CPAs and such to allow for that gap to be widened.
So do you think, Lawrence, that's going to be almost a necessity? Like, we all know, those of us in the military, we all know that like young E4 who buys a Dodge Charger with 26% APR, everyone knows that's stupid. But I'm talking about the young E4 who has a family, and, you know, a couple years ago, they were telling young soldiers to go on food stamps. And if you have a family, and every job in the military is slightly different, but some people work 65, 80 hours a week, depending on your job and if you're gearing up for a deployment. You can't shoot yourself in the foot, right? You can't make those financial mistakes like 26% interest rate on a Dodge Charger. But even if you're making all the right steps, we'll see what the military does. But I have a feeling that it's going to have to become a catastrophe before it gets up the chain, if that makes sense. It's not just like one E3 that's having a problem. It's thousands that are having a problem.
And I think to your point, I had never thought of it that way because of the idea that we have to move and how, well, sure, we can get paid an extra $1,000, but $1,000 actually is $500 of purchasing power.
Mm-hmm.
You're totally correct. And I ultimately believe that, and I'm on this drum now, the military doesn't have to adjust that fast. It's not their job, right? They're supposed to provide sustainable income, right? But the problem is that people are not seeking the education. So if I tell them, hey, if I'm gonna pay you, you're gonna get paid an extra $500 a month. Now you need to take ownership to do something with it. And there's a point that the responsibility goes from, oh, the government should pay us proper salary, to you need to do the right thing. Because I mean, you and I have done accounting on BAH, and we've seen how much we get paid. And the reality is that our pay is comparable. I won't say it's excellent,
right.
But you shouldn't be going hungry. At the end of the day, with the amount of money that the benefits that we have are excellent.
Right.
So we account for all that, but people choose to not get educated. You're going to end up being a 20-year sergeant major with one house. So they have to own up, you know, and the problem is that if they kind of like us three, we've all spoken in one way or another, like we are taking ownership of our finances, and that's what we're going to be fine. Literally, the government can throw any wrench, well, not the government, the world can throw any wrench at us, and we're going to be like, yeah, this is not ideal, but we're okay, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think you got to stop harming yourself. If you have external things you can't control, all you can do is do the best with the cards you're dealt. But if you keep going all in on 7-2 offsuit, you're going to have a 26% APR on a Dodge Charger. But one of the things that kind of concerns me, and the reason I started my podcast, I talked about this many times, is I was a traditional finance guy for a long time, meaning 401k, not that those are bad, Roth, and then diversify, put it into VTI or total stock market, because what the stock market does is it goes up compounded 8%, give or take, every year on average. And that is a bet that the American economy will continue to produce more efficiently, essentially, and that America will be more prosperous in the future than it is today. Now, after reading a bunch about macro, one of the things that got me thinking, like, why did the stock market go up? Obviously, we were all home, locked in a cage, and the stock market was ripping, right? You guys remember that during COVID?
Mm-hmm.
When they started, yeah.
Very much so.
That was like light bulb number one. Light bulb number one, like, okay. And a lot of times the market front runs what's going to happen in the economy. But then light bulb number two, when we're talking about bonds and government debt, and we talked about this behemoth pile of government debt, what happens when interest rates consistently drop, meaning the cost to borrow money consistently drops over time? People borrow more money, including the government. And that's what's been going on the last 40 years. The Fed has dropped interest rates pretty much progressively, all the way to zero. And that obviously causes stock market to go up because risk assets go up when interest rates are down. So do you guys think, with that backdrop, that traditional investing, because a lot of people say don't time the market, it's not timing the market, it's time in the market, which I agree with. However, when you have big flashing red lights, like, hey, the government's in debt, they're raising interest rates, who knows what they're going to do about that, but they can't go, if interest rates drop and that's what causes the rise, they can't go lower than zero. Technically they can, but they can't go lower than zero. So the only other way to go is up, and that's what we've seen the last couple of years. Do you guys think that that backdrop is something to keep in mind if you're talking to somebody about investing, like, hey, It's not timing in the market, it's time in the market. Would you ever tell somebody, hey, stop what you're doing and just sit on your hands for a little bit, because you can get 5% risk-free right now in a savings account? Is that something you guys think about?
I think that to me is that we need to continue to invest in all avenues, and I'll stick to like the all-weather idea of Dalio, right? Where he says 7% in gold, and I personally say 7% in crypto as well, right? At a certain point, you got to be prepared. So while I agree that the stock market could end up really bad, and the bond rates could end up terrible, and I think that that's what we're going to start seeing right now. The spot that people, like you said, interest rates keep going up. You have your house at 2%. You move out. You do not have the 8% to go move out a new house. You're screwed. And it's funny to think about this, because now those of us that are in the personal finance, when someone is like, I'm thinking of moving on base, and I'm like, do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a bad move. You know the cost, and you're fine. You know the cost of the house for this, as long as you're in the military. So we're going to see an uptick in people living on base, which is not really it's really right, wrong, or different. But I think that people need to continue to invest, because if somehow, let's say, and I've spoken, and Lawrence has also learned for this guy, David Walker. Let's say that the people that actually care about national debt do actually, in fact, tackle the national debt. We're going to be in for at least 5 years of pain, but we're going to come up shining at the end. In that time is going to be a key opportunities to be exposed to things that could gain and grow in value, right? So that's the only thing, right? Which, you know, high yield savings account, unfortunately, is taxable, right? So if you had something growing at a 5% not taxable, then that's even better, right? So we need to be exposed to all of them, and I have my own perspectives of how to address that. And the other thing to tie it back to what you said is that while we may have an 8% average over the last 23 years, what people negate is sequence of returns. And I am on a war against financial nerds that are like, oh, I can get you, let's say, 5% return. I was like, okay, but you cannot guarantee sequence of returns.
Can you define that?
Sequence of returns is, let's say if I have 2 negative years, let's say this is a better example, 3 negative years. Example is 2000, 2001, 2003. If you retire in the year 2000 and there's 3 negative years, your amount of money is going to drop drastically. I'll give you exact numbers. I have charged for this. $1 million with going in the S&P from 2000 to 2023 with a $40,000 withdrawal, which is according to a 4% rule, the person ends up with $825,000. But if I flip the return order and I put 2023, 21, and 22, 23, 22, 21, which was 2 positive years and 1 negative year, the person now ends up with $2.3 million. And so we need to be aware of sequence of returns, not only average rate of returns.
Yeah. But is that something that you can in any way forecast or prep for? As
Forecast,
far as
no. Mitigate, yes.
Okay. Okay. Awesome.
So,
Lawrence,
like,
what are your thoughts?
when you're talking about diversity, a lot of times people talk about, hey, let me diversify my stock portfolio, but diversifying your stock portfolio is still stocks.
Right.
True diversity is items that move in opposite directions at different periods of time, depending on how the economy is doing and how each of those individual assets are doing. And so with sequence of returns risk, yes, if you have 3 negative years on the front end of your retirement, your chances of retirement, as far as your income outliving you, drop drastically.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
sorry, go ahead.
I'm just saying there's different ways to assess that through different guaranteed contractual agreements in order to guarantee at least an income through that period of time. It's somewhat like your pension, but there are different ways to attack that, and you have different diversifying where things move in opposite directions. Bitcoin would be a portion of it, okay? But when the market dropped, it dropped as well because liquidity dried up out of the market. Okay,
Right.
so normally bonds and stocks traditionally don't move in the same direction, but as you've seen in the last 2 years, they do. And now they're raising interest rates, which drops the bond yields go up. It drops the thing down. Well, they have to refinance, I believe it's $3 trillion worth of bonds, which was quantitative easing during 2020 at 4 times the rate in which they were before.
Yep.
You have $1.6 trillion worth of commercial real estate has to be refinanced this year, or bought on ARM loans, where the vacancy rates skyrocketed over the last 3 years, especially with huge companies like WeWork just going out of business, filing bankruptcy, getting out of their loans. By the way, I think that was 1.6 million square feet that they're going to be able to renege out of their contracts for commercial real estate. The majority of commercial real estate is held by regional banks, not by the 5 largest banks that the government decided to stress test.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at inflation, diversifying your portfolio, and all of these different items, you're right. You cannot forecast what's going to happen. Can you go ahead and pre-mitigate some of those situations by diversifying between not just your stocks, bonds, crypto, all these things? Yes, because the outcome of retirement is income. That's the point.
Right.
You want to live off of it.
Income, but it's purchasing power.
Correct.
Because $1,000 in 20 years is going to be different. Right. Yeah.
Exactly. But the outcome is for you to have an income in retirement. So how do you try to guarantee some of it?
Jaime, you were going to say something?
And I wanted to throw in this in there because I'm going to take an advantage of the audience. And this whole conversation of creating income and having purchasing power depends on you having some money left over. So I wanted to say this. If you believe in Dave Ramsey, he is more wrong than ever. And if you do the 8% rule, you're literally asking to fall off a cliff. It is insane. Like, I don't agree with most he says. Once he said that, it was like, okay, now you're mathematically wrong. Out of your stage, right? So, sorry. If you believe in Ramsey, you're in this audience, I would go find another expert, fan, or
he's good at the debt thing. That's where I stop. If you're in massive debt and you need to get out, but he famously miscalled the 08 crash. I mean, he's a smart guy, but he said that when he's talking about 8%, folks, he's talking about an 8% withdrawal rate on your retirement. And mathematically, that's not going to work out, depending on how long you live.
Dude, I did the 8% withdrawal rate on $1 million on 2000 to 2023, and the person would have ran out of money by like 2007. I was like, this doesn't work.
Yes.
And Eric, to your point,
go ahead.
To your point on like, as far as like printing money and entering in the economy, you're absolutely correct. It does devalue your dollar, but there's more money in the economy. Go out there and get some.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think so. When we talk about predictions, here I'm going to throw a prediction at you guys, and tell me how this changes, if it changes at all, your investment strategy and advice you would give to people. Very rarely in investing, and if somebody ever tells you this is 98% sure, or this is this is my next stock pick, and I'm not going to give you a stock pick, but 100%, and I'll tell you why. 100%, the dollar will debase further at exponential rates. And by exponential, I mean just like exponential growth in your stocks, right? 2% and then 2% or whatever it is every year, it's compounding. The debasement has to compound as well. And here's why. If we have 34 trillion in debt, a lot of people say, well, tighten your belt and stop spending. Then you got to ask yourself, what do we spend it on? And we spend it on Social Security and the military and all these other things. So somebody's got to take a haircut. It really has to be old people. Social Security has to be, that's not going to happen, politically speaking. But let's say they did that, or they did something to the effect of tightening their budget, tightening government spending. They still need extremely high tax receipts to actually pay down the debt. And herein lies the problem. They can't get those tax receipts because when the government contracts spending, it contracts the economy, which causes a recession because the government has become such a big part of the economy. When they contract spending, it contracts the economy, which it fails their mission, because what the government actually needs is less spending and more income. So as they spend less, their income's going down as well. So they can't, my opinion, mathematically speaking, ever get out of this problem. I think, even if they wanted to, and I think the political will is absolutely zero to even try, and they're going to spend exponentially more. And so the dollar will continue to debase. And for the first time in our lifetimes, people who don't talk about finance are saying the word inflation. And it will continue to happen at exponential rates. And my concern with that is the government will become, if you study history, more draconian, more controlling of the economy, which is going to affect assets. Who knows what those assets are going to do? But in reality, it's not going to go well, because the government controlling anything makes it worse typically. So do you think that, number one, do you agree with me that that's a mathematical guarantee? And number two, does that kind of change, like the fact that you guys are in the military, I'm in the military, we're all planning on retiring, and you get a pension. That pension's based off of solvency of the U.S. government. Does that change how you guys think about your future and what you allocate in, etc.? Lawrence, we'll start with you. Go ahead.
Yeah, go, Lawrence. Yeah.
So what you have to look at also, Rule 72. The right rate for the government's interest rate is about 5.25% right now. Meaning right now at our current rate, our $33 trillion worth of debt will double in approximately 14.4 years. At $56 trillion, the interest is higher than US GDP. Also consider that only less than 40% of the US actually pays taxes. Everyone pays taxes in, but 60% of the US actually gets the same amount, if not more, back from the government. Okay, so you're right. There is a mathematical issue if we do not change something. The assumption is that we don't change something. The assumption is we do not reform certain projects, raise taxes to an extent, more people pay into taxes in order to create a more solvent government. Now, does that change how I invest? No, because not every single thing that I buy is a contract within the government. Now, do I use the IRS code? Sure. But not everything that I invest in is a direct contract with the government. And some of the companies have been around longer than the government has been as a country. So can it happen? Absolutely. If we stay on our current trajectory, we're all in real trouble. Is the solvency of the U.S. government depending on our veteran benefits? Yes. To include Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. But where do we take responsibility as a human being ourselves, as a U.S. citizen? And so does it change my investing strategy? Currently, some adjustments could be made, but looking at how the future works and guessing, if there's no reform, yes, we're all in trouble. But if there's no reform, we're not even a country at that point. Or the United States of China or wherever. And so what we have to consider is what can we affect in our own personal economy that affects the economy. We tell it what to do by how we spend, by how we save, where we put our money. And so you're right, it's devaluing because of the way that it's being printed. But if that money is not going somewhere and flowing into things, inflation doesn't drive up because we're not purchasing things. That's why it's got to go somewhere. Correct.
I think it's gone to assets the last couple of.
No, it has. But it's gone into other things because you watch the prices of everything else go up as well.
Right.
So yeah,
well, I mean, the last 10 years before, it was like everyone's talking about inflation.
Yes.
And it was more like 2%. I'm like, yeah, the money is still being printed, but it's going into assets. and it's going
Correct.
into real estate and
And some of them are depreciating assets.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Just look around.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
What do you think, Jaime?
Yeah, so I don't see me changing anything because I believe that taxes are going to go up, so I'm protected very well in not paying taxes.
Okay.
So I don't think I'm going to change my investment strategy. Well, take this back. If I had to change anything, I would probably buy more Bitcoin, honestly, or whatever. You know, I mean, I'm open to there being changes in the cryptocurrency side. Now, I believe that there's going to be a massive squeeze, like you said, but I don't believe we're going to see it in tax rates increasing. So what I believe, and this is something that Lawrence and I just heard of, that how do you fix this problem? One, you make the lower income tax brackets pay more. How do you fix that? You reduce the standard deduction. You take out credits. You remove services. And then you start removing all the supporting sides of the military. So I'll give you the perfect example. I don't know what the Army calls it, but MCCS, FSSs, gone. Right? So now a base like Clovis, like Cannon Air Force Base, has no entertainment. Bye. Not our problem. So if we lose tax credits, like the children's tax credits, and they lowered, if you think about it, something as simple as they lowered the standard deduction from, I think it's $27,000 to $25,000, that is a heck ton of money, and people are struggling a ton. So they don't have to just increase taxes, which the reform has to happen on January 1st, 2026, right, Lawrence?
Yes, I believe so.
So either January 1st, I think it's January 1st, 2026, or January 1st, 2025. I forget where the reform has to happen when Trump's tax law expires. If government does nothing, taxes go up. But if the reform does happen, they can just increase the tax brackets. Because I believe that, you know, whoever the president is at that time has to play nice and try to keep voters. So let's say they increase the tax brackets just by 1% or just $100. He plays coy, but then he smashes credits, smashes standard deductions, smashes programs. Now we got the money. And how do you fix that? You on the VA, you just get pickier. Less VA claims getting rated at 100%, right? So now certain things that we are accustomed to we deserve or we have earned, the government's going to be like, nah, player. Oh, I'm 100%. Nope, you're 60%.
Mm-hmm.
You just saved $1,000. So immediately we're going to see a change. Now, the people that have already gotten accepted, I don't see them changing anything, right? We're not going to change a whole lot on Social Security payments. But everybody from here on out, within the next 2-3 years, we're going to see massive squeezes. And that is, I don't see any other way to do it because no president wants to increase taxes.
Yeah, I have a different well, my theory, maybe I'm black-pilled, but looking at the math, I go, well, if you adjust this, because if you look at tax rates, they've been all over the place throughout our American history. But no matter what the tax rate was, the government always gets 20% of GDP. Mm-hmm. So the goal for any government is for GDP to go up. Because no matter what the tax rates were, 18 to 20% of GDP is what the U.S. government got. Right? Because if tax rates went up, GDP went down. Mm-hmm. And vice versa. So more people are paying in, et cetera, when tax rates went lower. So at a certain point, if you're a person in credit card debt, like you can tell somebody, hey, maybe stop getting avocado toast and maybe stop doing this and this and this. And then you look at the actual credit card debt they're in, you're like, you're in $500,000 in credit card debt? Then you're like, you're screwed. You're going to have to declare bankruptcy. And that's where I think the U.S. government is. And not to mention, like even the things you mentioned, there's zero political will to do it. Even if there was, I don't think it's mathematically possible. Because not only do they have to raise income, they're already, keep in mind, they're already spending as Lawrence said, 1.6, 1.7 trillion over what they're taking in taxes. So even if they raise their income, their tax income, let's say $500 billion, there's still $1 trillion in the hole. So they're just adding to the problem. And to me, and maybe this is negative Nancy, and I tell people going to happen. The monetary system we're in, and it doesn't necessarily have to be Weimar Germany, because we were talking before we started recording, like Argentina, they just elected a new president and he wants to put in a whole new monetary system. And they have 200+% inflation in Argentina. And it's not like World War Z over there, but it's bad. Like the economy's not working, a lot of corruption, etc. But I think that's where we're going. I think where we're going is exponentially more spending. So exponential more spending, exponential more devaluation. And when I was asking you guys, does that change your portfolio? I think that's smart to not say, well, you can't. You still can buy rare things like stocks, etc. They're still going to be profitable companies. But what I was specifically asking is, do you look at your pension, if you retire from the military, as something that is in this basket? And as you were talking about, Lawrence, you were talking about diversification. A lot of people think this basket, this pension basket, will never go away, ever. Right? It's guaranteed by the government. But if it did, what would happen? And that's I don't know. Maybe I'm off. Maybe I'm way off on that thought.
To your point, I see pension as almost is the equivalent of a fixed income annuity, right? So to me, I know Lawrence and I can agree with this. We're seeing our pension as beer money. I plan on never counting on any single one of those dollars.
He drinks a lot of beer, folks.
He does. And I just haven't told you this. I found out I'm allergic to everything in beer. Not alcohol, but everything that makes up beer.
Gluten? Are you gluten intolerant?
I'm not a gluten. I don't eat gluten-free or anything like that, but I have gluten sensitivities, and I'm really annoyed, and I am not going to be the guy that is going to go to a restaurant and be like, can I have gluten-free? Not happening. I'd rather get sick.
I'm going to text you a video after this. Though. Don't crack up.
So I personally think that people that are counting on their government benefits, right, are putting a huge gamble, because why wouldn't they just cut VA benefits? Why wouldn't they just cut pension? Well, maybe they can't cut pensions, but it's not going to be the same. Right now, all of a sudden, tomorrow, the government could be like, oops, my bad. Your 20-year pension is no longer 50%. It's 30. Sorry, you already signed up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They already did it once with BRS. Why wouldn't they do it again?
Yes. At least you had the option if you were already in, but
right.
To some degree.
So I think people that are counting on their pensions you're taking a massive gamble on your future.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree to some. I totally agree with what you're saying. The only thing is, if your pension goes away and that pension's federal, that says something really bad is happening. Like if you work at a state and you're a firefighter and your pension goes away, it could be malinvestment.
Mm-hmm.
But if your federal pension goes away, which this is my whole point, I think it has to change. Either the number keeps going up and the purchasing power keeps going down at a faster rate. That's what I project is going to happen. But it's not, the purchasing power you get today from your pension won't be the same in 20 years, even though the number probably will have quadrupled. It just won't be the same. What do you think, Lawrence?
No, I completely agree. If they told me that tomorrow, I'd be going and immediately signing contracts with other things that aren't the government in order to start subsidizing myself. So I don't believe that pension is awesome. I cannot wait to get it. I also am not completely 100% depending on it. The same thing as Social Security. A lot of people completely, do I think they're going to get rid of it? No. Do I think they could reduce some of it? Yes. But what you have to understand is, what is a pension? It's a benefit, correct? Mm-hmm. Anything that is a benefit, you are giving up freedom for.
Mm.
So you signed away 20 years of your life in exchange for that benefit. Mm-hmm. We invest is a terrible word. We put money into Social Security and for an exchange for a benefit that may or may not be there. If I could take that money and put it into other things, I wouldn't be pulling $2,100 a month in retirement. I'd be pulling $18,000 a month in retirement. And so, like, once we fully understand what we are betting on within those benefits and what exactly we are sacrificing in order to achieve those, you may rethink of where you put your money and your focus, and you may be a lot smarter with what you do throughout your life, because eventually you will not be young enough to dig yourself out of the hole. We can go to work. We can start another job. When I'm 80, I can't do that.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of Social Security. And the thing is, you need to self-insure yourself in your retirement for those things, because you will not always have access to go to work. Nor will you want to.
Well, I was just thinking with that to what you were saying, right? And I love that you're using the word benefit. And I haven't dove into this deep enough to find what a pension is on law, what it is. But the VA disability is a benefit, not a what is it that we're saying? People say not privilege. People act like it's a must. I'm drawing the blank on the right word, but it's a benefit, right?
A right.
Yeah. Or I deserve.
Yeah.
You do not have the right to your VA disability. You do not deserve the VA disability. For crying out loud, all of us did it. You walked up and you said, I will willingly protect my nation. And, and to be honest, in many ways, if our nation needs to take our VA benefit to make sure that the nation doesn't crumble, that's part of your civic duty.
Yeah.
Right? The benefit it can get taken away. I have not dove into, I have not gone into what a pension plan is, if a pension is a benefit or a right. I don't know that, right? But that is something to be aware of. And that's unfortunately the way the law is written. A benefit can be taken away like that.
Yeah.
I also think if the government and everyone were completely honest, think about how many wars we've had that were undeclared over the last 25 years because they were not declared wars. There were no war bonds sold in order to fund them, which is part of the reason we're in the hole we're in. So if we were completely honest, as we used to be with the American people, you know, we the people, then we would not be in the hole that we're in, because I believe for the goodness of the nation, the majority of people will be like, yes, I'm willing to pay more tax in order to keep this solvent, as long as there's some stability within the budget of the government to start paying off and working this out.
Yeah.
Problem is, that's not the case.
Yeah. The problem, there's a lot of problems, but one of them is, you were talking about war. You know, I had a neighbor ask during the Afghan withdrawal. He said, we're still in Afghanistan. You know, there's a lot of people like that. And the reason why is their W-2 isn't debited. It doesn't say minus $1,000 Afghanistan. So you got to ask yourself how they pay for it. The way they pay for it is printing money and debasing your labor, essentially. And I think, you know, we'll see. Yeah. But I think politicians, maybe I have a black pill, but they'll continue to do it at exponential rates, and look no further than the Republicans just pass it. Like, we need fiscal conservatism. And it's just like, okay, you cut butterfly gender studies off the budget. Great. So we still have 1.7 trillion of, you know, unfunded junk. So go ahead.
To one thing that I want people to understand, that the people that actually dive into really deep into national debt, right? And the people that actually care of our country. And if you are a service member or interested in the well-being of our nation, our debt is a national security concern. So if you truly want to protect this nation, our debt, therefore your debt, is a problem.
Massive problem.
Massive problem. So right now, I don't care how many guns you've got. If you're in debt, you're not helping out that much. And if you're being part of the problem in our national debt, you're not helping out that much. So that's really, if you think about it, doesn't matter how many guns, tanks we got if we don't have fuel to run them.
Preach.
Literally, at some point, there could be a bunch of F-22s with one Mark 84 and enough fuel for 20 minutes and be like, that's all we got.
Yep.
Just enough to protect our border. Well, Mark 84 is in our border. What is enough? But you get my point. So we have to lean into this, right? We need to protect our nation and protect our finances. And everybody, again, that comptroller general, all of them are thinking about, well, hopefully the good ones are thinking about it, that if you improve your personal finance, therefore you're improving national debt, right? You got to protect that. So you got to put yourself in a better position to put the nation in a better position. Instead of being another leech dragging our money and putting us in a worse position, right? Because it's not beneficial. And we have to be thinking about that in every action that we take and how we affect or interact with government dollars.
Agreed. And you know, the other thing, for those of us who are nerds, finance nerds like us, you don't have to be, but if you understand the math, if you understand why things have to happen a certain way with the national debt, then you can kind of, not saying you're 100% going to predict how it plays out, but you can kind of predict the future. Like, they have to spend more money progressively, but you personally don't, right? If you understand that this is happening, then you invest in things that the government can't print. That's what I tell people to do. And that's up to your knowledge, etc. But if you buy things the government can't print, for the life of me, I don't understand why people loan the government money. There's lots of people that do loan the government money, and they progressively just take on more. So that's the odd thing. A couple more questions, and then we'll wrap up here. So, with what I've been talking about, how, you know, interest rates, which are set by a central bank, interest rates are set by the central bank, and those interest rates causes home prices to go up, stocks to go up, and they're allowed to do some form of money printing. Do you think that our country is capitalist? And if we're not, why do you believe in investing in things like, it's not a trick question, but why do you believe in investing in things that are tied to capitalism, like, for, say, the stock market?
I think that our nation is capitalist, right? And I think that I don't want to. I'm nervous because I know this is not a gotcha question, but you're asking a question that I may not have enough depth of knowledge to answer, right? But I'm gonna say how I see it. I believe we're capitalist, and I believe that people should be producing. We should produce business and produce goods and services, and therefore entrepreneurs are ultimately what drives this nation, in a capitalist nation, right? To produce. With that, if we all stop producing, we would therefore be beholden to the government. And to me, that is the farthest swing away from capitalism, depending on government. So to me, while I don't think socialism has truly worked anywhere, definitely not communism. I don't think, I'm willing to be proven wrong. But I don't think it works with our people. So the furthest swing away from capitalism will be depending on government and depending on equal share of all our production. I don't think that that works with this, with the core values of this nation. Do I think it could work with the core values of other groups of people? Maybe, but just not here.
Yeah. Lawrence, what do you think?
I think we're an extremely capitalist nation that uses the capitalism of the entire country to fund social programs that create dependency. And so the money and the GDP is not the government. The government doesn't really produce anything that is traded.
Correct.
All the companies inside of it does.
Mm-hmm.
All the companies inside the U.S. And so do I believe it's a capitalist nation at the foundation? Absolutely. And I believe that our ability to produce GDP and gross domestic product and transfer those things throughout the world is what drives our nation to be great. But with that, I believe that there are a lot of socialist outlooks on how the outside of how that money is used.
Could you say what you said? I'm curious. Would you say that in that case, our nation is not capitalist? We're just a nation of capitalists.
I believe that. I believe that there's a lot of ideologies that are moving towards a socialist program that's completely being funded by our capitalism with individual nations, with individual companies inside of it.
Yeah. Is that what you were getting at, Eric?
We're a nation. We are a nation of capitalists.
I mean, no, like the way I understand or explain capitalism to people is if you're two people on an island, you don't even need to know what the word is, right? You either fight and kill each other, or you learn to have diversity of effort. You trade with each other, and you have a symbiotic relationship. That's capitalism, and it's free. You and I are exchanging. Yeah, I would agree with both of you. I think we're a nation of capitalist people, but we have swung very far away from free market capitalism because, Jaime, as you were saying, starting a business, every business you ever start, first step, government. So it's and all that does is slow down the economy, slow down GDP, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, so we'll see. I think the American spirit is something to protect, and I think majority of us are capitalists. Majority of people in general, I think, want to engage in capitalism, but they're promised. You guys ever heard of the marshmallow test with the kids? They give
yes.
Yeah. So I'll explain it real quick. It's, you put a marshmallow out in front of a kid and you say, hey, if you don't eat this one, you can have 3 in 15 minutes. And it's kind of a test to see if they can delay gratification. What a money printer pretends to do is create value because we tie value to a currency, right? And it's kind of like this boiling frog syndrome. But the government, and you're saying, Jaime, if we don't produce them, we got to go to the government. If we don't produce, in my opinion, there's nothing. If there's no stuff and we're all millionaires and there's no stuff to buy, we're all very, very poor. And real wealth is your access to goods and services, meaning you can afford it. And I think goods and services would significantly be cheaper. I'd be interested to hear this and your take on this. But if we're a capitalist country, capitalism is designed. If all three of us were competing in the same business, selling the same product, we can compete on customer service and price, right? And ultimately what that does is drive the cost down because we keep competing, right? You try to get more efficient and you can lower your price. And then I try to get more efficient, I lower my price. And that benefits the consumer. And what I ask people is, if that is capitalism, which is what it is, how come everything's more expensive? Everything you need, healthcare, transportation, housing, it's all more expensive. And not just in dollar terms, in real terms, like what you make versus the percentage you have to spend on housing. So with that said, do you guys still think, like, why do you guys think that is? Like, everything's more expensive and capitalism is designed to drive the marginal cost down. How come everything we need is more expensive?
Because the socialist constructs that are driving that up. Healthcare is more expensive because the requirement of health insurance forced upon every person in the country, in which then the provider can charge more, knowing the other person's not going to have to flip the full bill. And so when that starts happening, commercial real estate, other subsidies within the country, you're right, capitalism. If you and I were competing, Eric, in something, we can compete, like you said, on price, customer service, and the only thing I would add is speed of service. And so, like, how quickly I can get you to somewhere. If I can get a result in half the time you can, it's the same result, you're going to pay me more. I honestly believe that if we were to completely set everyone at a level playing field, and I draw this out all the time, there's going to be a value exchange between 1 to 2 people in which those same people still rise to the top. Because I'm going to exchange whatever I have for the value that you're going to provide to me. If I had the last drop of water in the world, how expensive is that? It's the most expensive thing on the planet. And so the subsidies in which these things happen, again, from the money printer, and then certain laws, and then certain fake capitalism, that's run by the government, which is not capitalist. That's what drives the price point up, because how can you compete with the fact that I'm trying to not only compete against you, I'm competing for government grants to outpace you now in my growth.
Yep. Yep. That's why you have, in my opinion, you have consolidation of industry, and savers or suckers in the big world. Because if you save for a rainy day and you're a business, and your other competitor is out competing you because they're spending every dollar they bring in, the rainy day comes, government bails them out. So you're the sucker because you decided to run your business with a balance sheet. And my only point about that is that has to end. In my opinion of the debt as a whole, is that we've reached that crescendo. Just like there comes a point where, and a lot of people call it, economists call it a debt spiral, where if you add more debt, it raises the interest rate, and therefore raising the interest rate adds more debt, which raises the interest rate again. Because what happens, remember we were talking, for those listening, people loan the government money. That's what a bond is, right? And people want a real rate of return, meaning if inflation's 9, they want at least 10%, give or take, but they want something above 9 if they're going to loan the government money. And if we have 34 trillion in debt and we have inflation that's 9%, what's 10% per year of 34 trillion? It's 3.4 trillion in interest. And then you should ask yourself, what are we taking in taxes? Like 4 trillion. So you got to say, how does this work? And the answer is, it doesn't. Yeah, and maybe I'm wrong to look at it kind of like in a negative, like my opinion, and this will be my last question for you guys, is it has to end. And I think the only question is the timing. I think it's coming sooner rather than later. Some people thought this in 2008. If you know who Peter Schiff is, he said it's the end of the world, government printing, yada, yada, yada. And then, we had a bull run for 10 years and whatnot. But there does come a point, everyone knows this, that printing becomes exponential. I think it's fairly soon. And so I know, Jaime, you and I have talked about Bitcoin, but when I think about diversification, I think about things that will go up, like you were talking about, Lawrence, that will go up when this purchasing power is going down. When your fiat, government declared currency, is losing purchasing power, it's going to be replaced with something. And people are going to want it to be replaced with something. What are your thoughts, Lawrence, on Bitcoin? Understanding, the country of Argentina is thinking about using Bitcoin as a national asset. El Salvador is too. But at the very least, whether you like it or not, the dollar is debasing. So what are your thoughts on assets like that?
So I think that it would be ignorant to ignore it. I think that is something that definitely should be at least part of your personal economy inside of a portfolio, held within certain constraints. Also consider, with countries like that are relatively small, keep in mind, we have to look at other alliances that are happening also within the BRICS nations. And so Ray Dalio did a really, really great study on the New World Order, showing the way that nations rise and fall and how long they typically last. And so we're coming towards the end, according to his math.
And it doesn't mean the hegemony, right? He talks about, it doesn't mean America's going to implode because England still exists. It means you are not the world dominating power.
Correct. And that's what I mean by that. We're not going away. Yeah. But if we don't make changes based off the debt cycle, so how do we go around that? Having assets, Bitcoin being one of them. Also, if you don't have money to purchase Bitcoin, you buy very, very little as it goes up. And so it really truly depends on, but diversity of a portfolio or things that move in opposite directions. And so Bitcoin could be, and should be at least a consideration within one of those assets that could move in opposite directions.
Yeah, I think that Bitcoin is huge. My concern is with Bitcoin is that governments don't accept it, right? So what do I think that we are due? Do I believe that there's something that we'll have in monetary reform in many nations? Yes. Do I think Bitcoin is the only answer? No. And I believe it comes down to the powers that be like being in power, and nobody controls Bitcoin, right? Yep. Nobody wants the kid that runs around throwing food at you, right? And I think that that's how governments see Bitcoin, right? So while I think it's really good for some nations because they're like, oh man, we don't have to control it, it's not our problem, it creates a free environment, I think that in many nations that is not going to fly, and that's what we are looking at. What is it? Correct me if I'm wrong. CBDCs?
Yeah.
Whatever those are, central bank
digital
currencies, right?
Yeah.
While I would love it for it to be Bitcoin because nobody controls it, I don't see. That's where I think that Bitcoin will struggle, right? Yeah. Nations are going to, like, especially the BRICS, which for that matter, and I had never thought of this. If the BRICS come out with a CBDC, do we benefit from having a Five Eyes CBDC?
Yeah,
maybe. I don't go. Don't quote me on this. I don't know any literature on this. But how do we? Because again, at the end of the day, monetary and dime is part of how we fight, how we protect our nations, right? Economic power is important. So if we just look at BRICS and a CBDC as a national security concern or a well-being of a nation concern, then what are we going to do? Should we accept Bitcoin? Maybe. Should we create our own? Maybe. Do we need partners? Perhaps. So, and again, this is where macroeconomics get way deeper, and I believe Eric is the expert in that. Now, this is one of those conversations that I generally feel is like I am not the smartest guy in the room, and I'm careful with what I say, not because I'm scared for being wrong, but I'm open to be wrong, but I don't want it to be seen as like gospel, right? Because I'm not an expert.
Sure. Well, we'll leave it at that. I said we're going to do an hour, so we'll have to do this again, fellas, because I got like 10 more questions and 8 more subjects I want to cover. But Lawrence, where can people find you on the interwebs?
So I have YouTube, but mostly I'm really active on Instagram at Green Color Finance.
Green Color Finance.
Website and such that you can look me up.
Is that greencolorfinance.com?
Yes.
Okay. I'll link those folks in the description below. And then Jaime, where can people find you?
People can find me in Instagram as a financial enabler, LinkedIn with my name, Jaime Gallardo, and I'm working on websites. But right now, the main places is Instagram and LinkedIn.
Right on.
Yep.
Well, thanks, fellas. I'll have you stick around after I end the recording, and we can talk offline. But folks, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you, especially if you're in the military, you got something out of this. And we try to make sense a little bit of the world. But thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. See you all in the next one.
Aloha.